over 500,000 chemical products out there today, with new ones being added every year. Because so many of you work in areas where there are hazardous chemicals, there are state and federal HAZCOM or right-to-know standards. The goal of these standards is to make sure you have the information you need to work safely with hazardous chemicals. Labels and material safety data sheets are a key part of that information.
Welcome to my laboratory. Every time you work with a hazardous chemical, you could be in danger. To lower your risk of injury, you need to know exactly what chemicals you're working with and what hazards they present. A good place to start is with accurate labels. Correct labels can make the difference by helping you work safely.
Hazardous chemicals in the workplace must be labeled, so you'll know exactly what you're dealing with. Reading these labels is a quick, easy way to get information about the chemicals around you. Labels should have at least 3 pieces of information: the name of the chemical in the container, the name and address of the manufacturer or other responsible party, and what hazard the chemical presents. You'll need to find the name of the chemical if you want more information on how it can be correctly handled. And if there's a spill or exposure, it may be up to you to tell firefighters or medical personnel the name of the chemical involved. The name and address of the manufacturer is also useful for getting additional or updated information about the chemical.
The specific hazards associated with a chemical can be expressed with words, symbols, or pictures on the label.
Sometimes charts like this are used on labels. The blue line tells you how serious a health hazard the chemical is. The red tells you how flammable the chemical is or how easily it will catch fire, and yellow is for reactivity.
A chemical which is highly reactive is explosive. Some chemicals are only reactive if heated, exposed to water, or mixed with other chemicals.
On a chart like this, the higher the number, the more hazardous the material. Some of the more common labels used include warnings for flammable chemicals, poisons, and explosives. Corrosive materials can eat away human skin or severely corrode steel. Oxidizers, or any materials with the oxidizer symbol, can make other materials more flammable, stimulating a fire or explosion. Oxidizers may be explosively sensitive to heat. A chemical that's labeled carcinogenic is associated with an increased risk of cancer. One symbol that's commonly used is a W with a line through it. Chemicals with this symbol on the label are dangerous when wet. Keep these chemicals out of contact with water. Besides the basics, labels may also have information about the personal protective equipment you should use and list special handling requirements.
While most containers of hazardous chemicals must be labeled, there are exceptions. These exceptions may vary from state to state.
If there are a number of stationary containers in a work area that all have similar contents and hazards, employers may post signs or placards with hazard information. If hazardous materials are within stationary process equipment, employers can use process sheets, batch tickets, blend tickets, or other written materials instead of container labels. These other written materials must have the same information as labels and be readily available to employees working around the chemicals. Sometimes an employee uses a portable container to take a chemical from the main labeled container. If the chemical is used right away by that same person, the portable container doesn't have to be labeled. But it's still a good work practice to label all secondary containers whenever practical. The other exception to the rule about labeling is pipe systems. Employers are not required to label pipes containing chemicals.
Labels can provide quite a lot of information, but to get more specific details, you'll need to get a material safety data sheet.
There should be a material safety data sheet, or MSDS, for every hazardous chemical in your workplace. MSDSs summarize key health and safety information about chemicals. They're kept on file, in notebooks, or on computer, where they're available to you. You should know exactly where to find an MSDS and how to use it. Though the specific format varies, MSDSs are broken down into sections. Each section gives different information. Some of these sections are highly technical and not very useful to most workers.
But don't be discouraged reading through all this jargon. There's some information you can use in the MSDS.
One section of an MSDS includes the name of the chemical and the manufacturer or supplier's name. Another section lists the hazardous ingredients by name. There's a section that describes what the substance looks like and what odor it gives off. If the substance changes appearance or doesn't match the description on the MSDS, don't use it. One section has information about the dangers of fire and explosion with the chemical, and what firefighting methods should be used if a fire does start. There's a section about reactivity, which will tell you if there are conditions you should avoid when using the chemical. For example, you may need to avoid mixing it with water or other chemicals. There's a toxicological section that describes the health hazards of being overexposed. There's a section with information about personal protective equipment that's required, along with any other special handling information. And somewhere in the document, not always in a separate section, is information about emergency first aid procedures to follow if you or a co-worker is exposed. There may be additional information, including proper disposal, transport, and regulatory information.
MSDS can be confusing, but it's very important that you know how to handle the chemicals correctly. If there's information you can't find, that's missing, or that's confusing, ask questions. Don't work with chemicals that you're not familiar with.
To take some of the confusion out of MSDSs, the American National Standards Institute has published a new 16-section recommended format. This format would put the information you're most likely to need at the front of the MSDS. This format is not mandatory, and it will take a while for chemical manufacturers to change over to the new format. In the meantime, every MSDS you look at may be different.
So, why should you take the time to really read over labels in MSDS? Because it's the safe thing to do.
The labels that you look at every time you pick up a chemical are reminders. Make it automatic that when you work with a container that says flammable, look around for sparks, electrical sources, or other fire hazards. If you work with corrosives or toxics, use the right personal protective equipment. Use the labels to help keep you on your toes.
There are an estimated 500,000 existing chemical products, with new ones popping up all the time. Labels and MSDSs can go a long ways towards helping you understand the chemicals you work with. Used right, they can minimize the risk you take in working with chemicals.